Boa tarde a todos, todas e todes. A gente inicia agora a mesa sobre formação de público para o audiovisual brasileiro. A gente, como eu disse nas outras mesas, oferece...
We offer the first minutes for institutions of the third sector that have projects for the audiovisual industry. I'm going to call João Fernandes, representing Instituto Moreira Salles. Thank you very much. Forgive my Portuguese. I don't speak Brazilian Portuguese. I speak European Portuguese, and I would like to thank SPCine for the initiative of this forum to propose the themes that we are discussing and the opportunity to question of what we are doing in Moreira Salles Institute. We are studying and everyone is welcome to think about the challenges we have ahead. We're in a very particular situation. The movie theaters are reopening, but it is not enough to retake our programming. And when we have the next panel, undoubtedly it's essential to have audience for the movie theaters, but also for the theaters, audience engagement, and how to make the audience to be able to feel that they have access to the movie theaters and that is their right. And this exists since the beginning of the cinema theater. The cinema begins by the distributors, and one of the possibilities for the audience to come is when they leave the factory, they have to understand that there's life after work and that movies can be a window to this life. That's why cinema has been so important in the story of people ever since it began. The cinema from its beginning was an art and an industry, and since as an industry it has been at the interest of the dominant capital, and also concentration of wealth. This reflects on this cinematography. We have about 2,300 movie theaters in Brazil, but 1,200 are screening Doctor Strange. There is a lack of free choice, and many who stand for the market and competition, but it is necessary that people become conscious that this is a threat to democracy when people don't have the right to go to know the story of cinema, when they don't have the right to dialogue with the history of cinema, because it has been told from a point of view that excludes from the cinema great part of humanity. This is the official cinema story of a world that was formatted within a story Euro-American point of view, and we know that the reality today is beyond this. That's why public formation is also working with diversity of programming, and also the diversity of incentive of people to make movies. It's important that the cinema can be developed from an early stage, but also the possibility can be a dream for all of those who know cinema. It's important that this specificity is expressed in Brazil through the transparency of the diversity that make the Brazilian culture. The racial, sexual, and social differences are essential to understand the experience that the cinema can expose. The Brazilian cinema has been ahead of this. This is one of the ways of knowing the country, and thus the programming have to have as a concern to become screens of for the Brazilian cinematography in the last decades. The Brazilian cinema, after the periods of resistance and very difficult times, is coming back to and facing resistance, and they're very different than in the past because the productions are more plural, and the fact of having a black cinema that is coming forward in Brazil, also the indigenous people, that changes the perspective of those who are on both sides of the camera. Thus, to bring diversity to Brazil and to protagonize the diverse look at Brazil has to be something essential for public acquiring, so for a cinematographic production. It's a fact of being here at Avenida Paulista with dozens of movie theaters, and to be able to communicate and bring people to the movie theaters is undoubtedly important. And this is so much better done as several kinds of programming that can happen. When the pandemic began, one of the main challenges of AMS was with closed movie theaters, how could cinema be present? How our programming could continue in this situation with the on-site was impossible. And it wasn't possible. We began then a program that transformed this kind of view. We created a program called Convida, which was a program that radicalized the research for cultural access in Brazil. And all of our we looked for other curators, and we built a portal that today is consulted in the IMS, which is a extraordinary demonstration of the diversity in Brazil. Many films were possible, many films that are enriching our recovery, and that were done with very little resources. The resources are always important, and they always have to face the transfer of funds. They have projects to work, and they don't have conditions to do it. And the moment where there is no policies from state or official institutions which are solid, which could be solid in Brazil, there is a necessary work to be done by all of us. That's why I'm very glad to be here with you, talking about the dilemmas that we have to face, and also to listen to what you have to say, to learn what way we should follow. From the pandemic, the presence of our relationship with the public cannot be limited to movie theaters. So in the pandemic, we discovered that we could make programs for the whole of Brazil. We could program beyond the movie theaters for people from different regions of Brazil, but to program means to have ideas and interaction between people. That's why we're working on a streaming platform, so it's possible to add the IMS movie theaters, the virtual movie theaters, where we all can meet and talk and watch movies, and also talk about life, because that's what matters for life. If we have Doctor Strange, this is something that we should take on, and we can do in conjunction. Thank you very much. Thank you, João. My name is Vitor, coordinator of Observatory. Now we are having the dissemination and boosting audience engagement for Brazilian audiovisual outputs. Luciana Jambuska, Ademar de Oliveira from Espaço Itaú, Carol Misorella, representing Taturana, Fábio Lima, representing Sofá Digital, and Zinho da Juário Cine TV. Before I pass the floor to Kiko, I would only like to ask the audience that we have a QR code on the screen. That's where you can send your questions, and the description on the YouTube, you also have the link for asking questions. Thank you. Kiko, you have the floor. Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank SPCine for the opportunity of being part of this initiative, and now the recovery of Brazil. I think that talking about public engagement of the audience is to defend the Brazilian cinema and to advertise Brazilian cinema. That's why I want to begin talking about Cinemateca. That's where our history is, that has gone through the worst moment of its time and reopens on this Friday to the general public. Impossible not to say this at this point, but also the Cinemateca, the Sucumbista movement has to be remembered. The origin of the Cinemateca is in Cine Clube, which is the club of cinema of São Paulo, and I tried to get current data from cine clubs in Brazil. I only got information from 2015 from Audiovisual Office of São Paulo, when we had the Ministry of Culture. In 701 cities there were cine clubs. It can seem a lot, but this is only 12% of the number of cities in the country. I don't know how these figures are currently. Due to everything that has been happening, must have decreased, not increased, but we're going to talk about public engagement of the audience. We're going to talk about the technological aspect, the video cassette, DVDs. There are also different spaces where you can watch movies. I think it's important to remember this. I'm going to remind you of the film festivals, which is an audience engagement means. And also in the Forum of 2021, there were about 308 shows and festivals in Brazil, and practically 100 of them, in a certain way, were from the law Aldir Blanc. So it's an important number of events promoting the exhibition of films. And I think it's important to mention the number of movie theaters. The news is not so good because before the pandemic we had about 2,500 rooms or spaces, and due to the pandemic this number was reduced. I'm going to talk about Circuito SPCine because I know it personally. We have 20 movie theaters here in São Paulo, in places that there were no movie theaters, enabling many people to watch and go to the theater for the first time. I have heard the news that there are more 20 rooms, but the perspective is of 10 more movie theaters to be inaugurated in the next few years. Another initiative here in São Paulo that I think is great is also in the Forum, that takes the making cinema to the peripheries of the outskirts of the city. And everybody, not everybody of course, but the access to the audiovisual productions is much less complicated than a while ago. So the audience engagement, people have a critical stand. So in times of fake news, this should be a must, to know who is behind that, what kind of discourse it is, and this goes through the audience engagement and goes through knowing, consuming. Sorry, I didn't present myself. I'm a filmmaker, director of Como 70, reporter of the audiovisual industry. I have TV programs that I run. I'm correspondent of Cine Jornal Brasil since 1999. It's 23 years following closely in the state of São Paulo what's going on with the audiovisual industry. So everything that I mentioned was seen by me. I saw it with my own eyes. I'm an optimistic regarding everything, because there was a moment where there wasn't SPCine and Cine, the black population making films. Mix Brazil didn't have a competition, or we only had short films and not feature films. And despite the cultural suffering through this period, we have a good chance to turn this around. Going back to this, before passing the floor to our guests, I would like to remind you that a country as big as Brazil, the role of broadcast TV, the low number of Brazilian films is scary. People have to know that there is Brazilian cinema, and there's a data here that in 2021 from the magazine Tel Aviv, 3,000 feature films were presented, and only 5% were Brazilian made. So we had cable TV. Canal Brasil came up in 2028. And everything that has been produced has gone through Canal Brasil. We have, besides broadcast TV that caused a revolution in the market, such as the streaming platforms are doing at the moment, which made productions more democratic in terms of Brazil. And to show that we have a lot to talk, I have to say that there is a sad research from Datafolha with Itaú Cultural, amongst other figures, that say that 19% of the interviewed have never seen a Brazilian movie on a movie theater. So there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of work ahead. And the Brazilian cinema has an advantage, which is its main characteristic, which is diversity. Perhaps what is lacking is the audience to find films that they like, because I believe these films, this kind of film exists, and I think we have to look at to other countries, and several countries would have more interest in this than us, and we have to invest in child films, and because if you get used to seeing or watching movies since an early age. That would be it. Thank you, everyone. And let us go to our guests here. Ademar, you're here by my side. I think I'm going to start with you. Present yourself and talk about your experience in Espaço Itaú, which is certainly a safe harbor for the Brazilian cinema. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, SPCine, for the invitation to participate in this debate. This panel is about engaging audience. I'm wearing black pants, white shirt. I am a white male, but I am Brazilian born despite my different characteristics. What I can say is I'm going to talk about audience engagement. So I'm going to talk about programming films because the audience engagement begins with the programming of films. And my story, and quickly, let's just present ourselves. I think I missed the point here. I'm going back to Kiko. I'm going to describe myself. I'm a bald man using glasses. I have a beard, red shirt, and black trousers. I passed the floor to Ademar. He presented himself. So I began this in the 80s in Cine Clube Bexiga. I went to Rio de Janeiro. Cine Clube Estação Botafogo. I now returned to São Paulo to create other movie theaters, creating up to 140 movie theaters and then I'm going to explain how we are going to break paradigms from where I learned, which was Cine Clube. Besides Ademar, we have Carol Misorelli, which is co-founder of Taturana. Good afternoon. My name is Carol. I'm a white female. I have red trousers and a black blouse. Taturana is a social organization focused on socializing cinema. We work with audiovisual products with the focus in economic social aspects, and we are running since 2014. Thank you, Carol. And beside Carol, we have Sofá Digital. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Fabio. I am a white male with black trousers and a black jacket. Sofá Digital is an aggregator of content for streaming platforms for distribution in VOD, distribution in transactional platforms, essentially films, and for rental and purchase. We also work with SVOD, Netflix, Prime, and others. And more recently with Rode, with the possibility of monetize distribution. This will help in audience engagement as well. This is a great opportunity for us to expand the reach of our audience. And I'm very thrilled with this moment of digitalization because it has been 20 years working and trying to help with the distribution of independent content digitally. Now, Licino Ojoário, good afternoon. I'm Licino Januário. I'm from Angola. I've lived in Brazil for 15 years. I'm an actor, producer, filmmaker, and an instructor of capoeira. I'm founder of AMTV, an independent with a focus on the production, distribution, and especially the consumption of content made by Black people. We go back here to Ademar, that is going to tell us about his experience. So basically, on the origin of the program, Cine Clube in Brazil, different than many places in the world, is characterized by working the arts, because in the but actually, what was the market? Since I know myself as a person, people always worked together with the people that they knew, and what we had to do was question several things. So the film club here in São Paulo and then Rio de Janeiro, we had to find out films. We didn't have access to commercial films because we weren't part of the cartel. It was good that we had to learn to showcase and distribute and make events and to re-event ourselves as well. This, in audience engagement, is there were several problems. The first problem is passing only one kind of film. Are you forming a ghetto or an audience ghetto? For children film, and the children that we trained in 82, 83 became professionals in their own area, and this was something that we had to deal with. Since we didn't have access to childhood films, we did the Projeto School project. This we're talking about the 80s, the beginning of the 80s, and up to the year 2001, we created the professor club or the teacher club. If I have films, for example, that don't have the same advertisement of the commercial ones, I'm going to call them tools, the professors or the teachers, as propagators of to spread the word, and they were essential for this. This was a project done in São Paulo in 2001. We had 4 teachers in the first session. Now we have over 4,000 tied to movie theaters. So we give them once a week a session, a screenplay, for children that saw 1 or 2 films a year. So we're breaking the paradigm of this isolation, this ghetto which was the cinema, because the audience engagement, I direct a person to go only to that place. So it was also in 2001 that we launched here in São Paulo the concept Artplex that was supposed to go in the same room. So we had already broken the cartel that existed and made this possible. So at the same room you had commercial films and all other kinds of films depending on each region, and it worked very well, and this opened the doors for us even in shopping centers, because we were seen as pretty boys that made art films.
And so by doing this, we built a citizenship and a diversity that existed since the film clubs. So accessing distribution was really important, and also production issues. These are the issues that we saw. I'm not talking about an individual action. I'm talking about group action. People who try to have the same kind of rationale. including the commercial system. IMAX was brought by this group of professionals. This group brought this new technical exhibition equipment called IMAX. Now, when we have online exhibits that always had competitors, VHS, DVD, or others, in this structuring of power, the only weapon they have is the unity of people who like to get together. So we doubled down on that. We started using this genre of films, not because of ideology, but that was the only thing we had. We did what it is called the street cinema making. We're talking here about processes that have to do with audience engagement. Audience engagement does not take place in one single place. I have nothing against shopping malls. Remember at that time, I was accused of working for a foreign agent because I was being sold to the big cinema. Today, everybody is engaged in this because a big film is there and pays for expenses that small films cannot do. You have to pay for the products you want to show. We have to see that in the scheduling for festivals today, which refers to audience engagement, can only exist if you make these films available to people. The way to make this film available in theaters, we have to comply with some savings. How to maintain our diversity within a commercial structure. So we did this engineering in order to achieve what we wanted. This is considered a case. Recently, there was this movie from Lázaro Ramos. Who has already watched this kind of movies here in the audience? Well, there are many people here who did watch. Now, we have to talk a little bit more about audience engagement. Lázaro Ramos' film was shown in 180 copies. It is a kind of commercial film that can have a sequel, number 1, number 2, number 3. It is based on Assunção's book. And a lot of things can be created based on this first film. When I saw the work and the dedication of Lázaro to make this film, I decided to change the opening. So what happened is that in the 300 theaters that this movie was shown in Brazil, there was one specifically which is more profitable, much more profitable than the others. Is one theater located in São Paulo. So I went for answers. So audience engagement, what does it mean? You look at the theater and ask, what did we do 2-3 years ago when black production films were shown here? Brazilian films, or Afro-Brazilian films, were exhibited there in that movie theater. And recently, a film, Semi of Soul, was not going to be released. I went to Disney and asked them to say, well, I saw this movie in London, and I went to Disney myself and proposed to them that I pay for the registration of the movie, and we're going to launch it here, to release it here in Brazil. What happened? Where did the people go watch it? Well, in that movie theater here in São Paulo. In the region of Augusta. It was important to do it together with other action. This resulted in audience engagement. The first 10 theaters, we have 5 of them that work diversity here in Brazil, with 370,000 spectators, and I believe that this number could be much higher. Just to wrap up, I would say that audience engagement is an ongoing and diversified work. Does involve different age groups. I have a professor club program, and I have a student program. I direct my focus on different age groups so that we have more people attending theaters. Sometimes we have problems because during my 40 years of work, I had 3 setbacks. Sometimes we go forward and there's a setback. Go forward, a setback. In terms of the future of the movies, I am not scared, because if we engage the audience, we're going to have audience for a long, long time. This is what I believe in. We have to try to give an overview in terms of audience engagement, not only one single theater, but different theaters, having partners such as Banco Itaú or Banco Nacional. We have a project that exists since 1965 with the same sponsor, which did audience engagement and created theaters the way it was done. And this is an ongoing project. We have more tools. Now we're using the possibilities of online tools, the possibilities that they provide us. And this is what it is important for me, to encompass more and more people and fostering thus audience engagement. Now we're going to talk about alternative theaters. So tell us, Carol, how do you see this innovation in terms of dissemination of Brazilian content is important to audience engagement? Well, Taturana was born out of this questioning. There were many productions that dealt with important topics and also interesting topics that were there was a captive audience, but they knew little about the existence of these productions. I believe this was our first point, or a starting point, and then we started to engage specific audiences to discuss certain films. In order to do this, Taturana is based on certain principles. First of all, is the existence of several groups, for example, film clubs or spaces where people could watch movies and go on discussing after these sessions. In order to do that, we use a platform, our own platform, a Taturana platform, with 3 registered exhibitors, and they organize screenings in their own collectives. Some film clubs have been going on for some time, and we have also some school film clubs. And we started with the existence of these groups, and by doing this, we are able to disseminate those movies. When I talk about audience engagement as an invitation or a call which is personalized to each one, why do I think this movie may interest you? In particular, I believe our work is very specific in the sense of creating and understanding the strategy of disseminating that film and where this movie can cause more social impact. When we look the movies one by one. We build a specific strategy for each one of them and mobilize the circulation in those theaters. Within distribution, we call it extra theater. These are independent spaces, non-commercial theaters that exhibit this production. This chain exists and it is present today. In terms of public policies, we often hear that this chain is born and dissolves very quickly. It has a short permanence. It can exist film club can exist 1 year and disappears the next year. It is important to know that there is this understanding of the space, and this has to do with this field which is very dynamic. Today, if you ask me if we could have an app to ask who today this collective online debates of a certain films, I'm sure we'll find thousands of organizations, groups doing this. We can count on them for audience engagement. There's also another important point to think about. When we engage the audience, we have partners, groups that immediately understand the relevance of circulating or showcasing those works. People who are almost co-distributors, they are co-responsible to promote this showcasing of these works. This is what we have seen at Taturana throughout those years. We saw campaigns that had positive impacts within each one of the niches to count on these exhibiting spaces, and then what has been discussed and who participated. We see that we have important results as to public and audience engagement. It is important that when we think about showcasing, we have to think that distribution also takes place in those spaces. These spaces have to be thought out from the consumption of a model to showcase the film or distributing the film. I believe it is very important when we think about showcasing a movie to establish a priori when this or where this movie is going to be outside of commercial theaters. When we work with a film crew, we see that there is no deepening of reflection about the showcasing of the work. Some people say, well, I want to be seen in festivals and theaters and then streaming. It is important to go beyond all that. Who doesn't want to follow this path, right? Well, I believe we cannot think only about this path. It's overly simplified. We have to look at other factors that are available at Spcine. If we see that 90% of the movies that are released have an audience which is less than 10,000 spectators, we have to look at our film and say, how many exhibits am I going to have for this film? We have to be able to see the specific window to have this movie showcased. I'm going to mention two examples that I find interesting. Last year, we released the movie Sementes from Embaúba Films. We did this impact distribution, and Embaúba was a commercial distributor, so it was a very good partnership. We did an online release, 1,500 people watching the movie at that time. It had 140 visualizations online, and it had an impact in several schools, and that led to debates about representativeness of black women in institutions. And this is all very significant to bring up the relevance of watching a movie within a very important and relevant concept, to give all this meaning for people to get together to watch that specific film. You bring in another call. And finally, I'd like to mention, in the case of the movie Revolta, and this was pre-pandemic times, we worked in partnership with Moreira Salles Institute. We decided to work with Moreira Salles Institute to use a theater at 2 p.m. It was free of charge for students of public schools throughout the state of São Paulo. When we think about audience engagement, when we think about occupying the city, this was a very important agenda. In this case, we said it is important to have some sessions in movie theaters, and we talked to the students that were with us and asked them, what do you think would be interesting? And this thing was designed this way: one session a day at Moreira Salles Institute at 2 p.m. And it was free of charge, and always a place to gather students with other groups, and advocacy groups and protest groups, everybody together. These spaces were occupied by these groups who discussed important topics for students. I say all this, why? Because it's not enough to have a space, an open space or closed space. The space, in order to be democratic, needs to be transformed. It needs to be a space that gives sense to my occupation. And this is why, together with Gundo, we proposed the occupation of the Moreira Salles Theater Hall. And I believe that it was really interesting and important. It's wonderful because it talked to the audience about the film. Well, actually, every time we begin the distribution and circulation of a film, we do a planning beforehand with a group who is kind of co-distributor along with us. In the case of Sementes, we brought in several groups to discuss the best strategy. And with Secondos, we got 30 people with us, and they were co-responsible for circulation strategy. Together we defined what the strategy would be. With this, we get the circuit going, and I believe that we have to do things in dialogue with these groups. You are rocking the market in the good sense, if you will. Now, Fabio, let me ask you, how do these big platforms, and it's interesting and important that you explain how you work with them. How can they disseminate Brazilian alternative and commercial Brazilian content without talking about quota, without mentioning quotas? Well, I believe that in general, we are all undergoing a process of evolution, basically because of competition. The way this contribution can be carried out in a consistent and long term has to do with competition. The simple fact of others competing for content, albeit a commercial content, makes the emergence of talents we see that we have more independent talents, both in direction and production. And this is really important, especially when we want to engage the audience, when we empower and expand our star system. This is really relevant for all new projects, films, and contents. This connection with an association with the talent. This has to do with the way this content is distributed today. In order to have a Brazilian commercial content with an X talent, and at the same time having the possibility of having the content of another that will provide a better circulation of the film due to the fact of having the same cast and the same director. This is why cast is so important for that. This is a place where a space that we did not have before. All the effort that was done before paid off. It is a day-to-day kind of handwork, because it depends on the physical space, availability of the films, and restrictions of doubling and closed captioning and reduction of the cost of distribution, physical space, and all this in a super concentrated market. The national production concentrated in one single media group, and this is really important because that concentrates also talents. In the beginning of the years 2000, all the Brazilian movies had to be talents from global TV network. Foreigners would participate in a different way. Today, they are placed in one single place in which we cannot compete in a market that there is no restrictions. You have to go beyond foreign content. I believe this is the most important thing. The market has to understand no streaming service will advance beyond with foreign content, because people who are interested in seeing foreign content is much smaller than the ones who want to see Brazilian content. There is a concentration of money in that audience. We don't have more than 20 million people that would pay for content. They're the same people who go to the movies that subscribe to pay TV. It was never more than 20 million. The streaming services will not go beyond 20 million. People who would pay to rent a movie or for TV and now pay for streaming. They're basically the same people. You have more than 200 million people that watch free of charge content. When we talk about the growth of Netflix, there is a relationship of costs, basically, and also time management. People are not watching content the whole time. And we are in the world of abundance of content. And this gives people the possibility that everybody try to tell their own story and find their own audience with different monetizing possibilities. It's possible to produce cheaper content, to talk about a segment of this audience, to try to find a sustainable distribution without being so successful. And these spaces will happen naturally. You offer a film, people have difficulty to find content, and again, with what Adamar said, the movie making is reborn with a different importance. If it is shown in theaters, it will be given a special seal. We have gone over the phase that this movie was done for theaters, exclusive for theaters. And this paradigm has been broken. Today you have access for all types of culture. We have an abundance of offers. This depends on how we're going to organize this from now on and how the dynamics of the market is going to be from now on, specifically involving copyrights of works. We have seen some independence for these productions, but they have always been associated to a TV channel or a programmer. And this hinders the circulation of those works. Again, competition will allow for producers to have more flexibility in negotiating different windows and also defining the path for their movies. What path can I explore? And this is good for cinema in general, because those films which have more commercial films will have their own space, and this will also help smaller films. By doing this, we stimulate the participation of these platforms in terms of funding, which comes in the absence, or rather the presence of competition without public funding. You go to a traditional market, which is pre-sales, the model that works in the United States and Europe. This is important because it can guarantee that you will produce a niche content or author content looking at the base of your subscribers in terms of retention. At home, people are much more open to watch national content if compared to theaters. There is a barrier that is easier to be overcome, and this will impact theaters if you have more investments upon the release of these films, because you have a commercial strategy. We know that this movie will go to that platform. It is compromised with that specific platform. It is connected to VOD. The last window, which was the revenue of broadcast TV, which was really important for big movies, was always limited to big movies, because broadcast TV, although it is free, it also restricts. It's 85% of broadcast TV programming is religious content, released or leased space. If Rede Globo is broadcasting a soap opera, nobody's going to compete with Global Network. So the non-20 million Brazilians who pay for content, they are still interested in content but have no access to it. And this is what I see, VOD and free advertisement streaming television, which is Pluto TV. It is an app that you navigate just like NET, several free of charge channels. And Sensub also is present in all smart TVs. You turn on Samsung, you have TV Plus and other. We also found with 2 channels. One is 24 hours of Turma da Mônica, among the 3 most watched TVs, analog or otherwise, and a channel for action, thriller, and terror films called Adrenalina Fusão. We want to have national content and diversity content, because we want to compete with broadcast television. People never before had access to so many films. It is an education of the audience in terms of what films to watch. And again, Brazilian films are very well received by this audience. We do some research with people, and we manage the films. And to know where to watch, we tell people where to find movies, either blockbuster films or smaller films. And people sometimes say, because dubbing is needed in the streaming platform. When we're expanding the audience and dubbing and movies become more and more popular, dubbing is really important. Many people say that they prefer Brazilian films because they don't need dubbing. We are now at a time when people will not see the difference, but the star system will make a difference because we have the right environment and the relationship to see and relate to what they see on the screen. Answering your question, how they can help by maintaining the market really growing and believing in the talent.
Could you talk about your experience in this universe? How can a streaming service, more alternative streaming service, can contribute to audience engagement? Okay. So, as I mentioned, I'm an artist. I come from civil engineering. So, I'm not very romantic in my speech, and Brazil makes us not be romantic as well. It's 10 years that I dropped civil engineering and working independently in an independent way and having a discourse that brings us, and I'm very observant. This setback in this cyclical movement, there's an advancement and there's a breakdown. And then I say this because this is a project that comes from before. We're not the first ones to try to do this. Black content that comes from many names, comes from Zazagugu, and we come romantically, we come from this audience engagement. My 10 first years for entertainment in Rio de Janeiro from the theater, and we from 2014 to 2016, we changed the mentality of consumption in the theaters of Rio de Janeiro. This through a collective movement, the Black collective movement that works in SESC, and the tool that helps us a lot to have this economy. Está estourando. Technological era that we are living in. Due to racial, the hair, makeup, these are the main points that potentialized these tools. So this was the tool that we used also to potentialize, to change the consumption mentality in Rio de Janeiro. And now we have shows that were only 20 people as an audience, and now we have many more. So we followed this process until we reached the role. And the streaming platforms came along, and we analyzed that the traditional channels have new narratives, and this was a mentality. You can say that after George Floyd, things started to change. There are more black people in higher positions, and it's sad that something like this has to happen to impact the whole world. So we analyzed this process, and analyzing what we were doing in the theater, if we have this audience that wants to consume theoretically, and we have the technology in our favor, why not use this? And we created something with my partner, who works with technology for over 20 years, and that's it. It's been a mission that is quite painful, but at the same time very interesting to follow. I say painful because we have a racist consumption mentality. If we analyze, we have over 14 million black companies created by black people, and none of them had success. So we have a racist mentality for consumption. That is the reality here. And this is a struggle that bringing these issues, we're back to square one. If we normatize the consumption, and there's a great struggle. This analysis of consumption, what is invested in marketing for these productions and what is invested for national productions is surreal. This is a struggle that is insane, and that's it. That's why we have problems. I participated in a process for a large streaming company, and during this process I said, well, I'm a warrior. If I work there, I'm going to bring discord, and it doesn't make it doesn't make sense to make a 30 million production. We have very famous people that if we see people that have a popular narrative that has a great consumption, because that's what people want to see. For example, we're going to have a production made by us. To have a minimum audience, it has to become viral. Sometimes we see the number of black families growing, and we only want to do, they only want to produce black American or North American productions. So in this process, I thought it made more sense to take these 30 million, distribute them for black production companies, and that in fact they can decentralize this market and in fact struggle to not only think about Rio and São Paulo. Brazil is a huge country, and when I talk about consumption, I had an impact that was quite pleasant, which is an itinerant. made by black women from Salvador, and I watched over 500 films made by black people, films produced from 2018, 19, and 2020. If you ask people here how many black movies they have seen, it's going to be very few if we ask the audience. So there's a lot to go ahead of us. We're betting a lot in the streaming to be able to have this autonomy, because we can't wait. We have urgently to change this negative image that audiovisual is still being constructed by white people. Blacks are always seen as the bad guys. So we are in the struggle trying to use these tools to demystify this notion, and it's a very arduous work. And we are struggling to try to understand how to circumvent this kind of thinking. The first tactic would be to have a great marketing investment to force this, which is not going to happen because nobody is going to invest in this from one day to another. So that would be it. Now we are going to bring content coming from Angola, Mozambique, but Brazil is the country of Portuguese language to the world, as the United States is English for the rest of the world. My generation grew with Brazilians being okay. We're here talking about the recovery of the audiovisual industry. What is your impression regarding the audience? Did it change during the pandemic? Did the pandemic help in the audience engagement? More Brazilians are consuming this film of Lázaro. If you want to go to this, the session that I watched from Lázaro's film ended with a huge applause. It's more of a food for thought that and I'm considering these two last years, because 2019 is a time of thrill. And we just made available in YouTube all the news from 2019. Mix Brazil, we have Jefferson D. So there was the impression that everything was going, and all of a sudden, boom, everything stopped. Well, a sensitive experience. And we had 2 years without any audience. I always joke saying that those rainy days established this human side. Nobody goes to the theater when it's raining. So I think it's the following. Cinema is already getting filled up in the popular or outskirts, because the population in general is not a danger for him. It's better. It's safer than riding a bus, actually. For the middle class, this danger is even worse. I am not a... I'm sorry, we are having audio problems. And to classify the movie, it's more dangerous than going to a bar. And this happened due to a mistake. So what I see in the return of the audience to the movie theaters, we had a blockbusters having a box office of over 3 million, and in the Lázaro on the other side with the different characteristics, almost 400,000. We're going to reach 500,000, and then we're going to try to make this even higher, because there's a film that has something interesting. If I think about the Colombian movies, this evolved from documentaries to talk about all of our issues. And once I noticed that the Colombian movies talked about it in fiction movies, and the Lázaro is a dystopic, futuristic production. When the youngsters watch the film, they don't have anything to talk about, because it doesn't have to do with science. It touches people emotionally. They react to this piece. In this aspect, I see his geniality. He can make a mini-series, a continuity, or a sequel, and there's perhaps another decree. I think this is a great merit of the film that is going through the reaction from the audience that he's mentioning, not only here in Salvador, Rio de Janeiro, Belo Horizonte, is someone that is finding something that they like, which is to watch a Brazilian movie in the theater with other people, because this is the secret. If you see it at home, you see it with people that you know. You already know their reactions. When we watch people with unknown persons, you find out what their reactions are. Some people laugh, what kind of laughter they have, because you don't know who's sitting beside you. I think this is that's what made Lázaro a success. I agree with the comment he's made, and making this movement that you go back and you have to surf the wave and come back. And the feeling is, after 40 years working, there are still issues that are coming afloat. The diversity in general is one of them. The issue of races, of self-esteem. I remember in the presentation in the synagogue, I was with a professor that was Minister of Culture, and we were talking about the difference of the United States and Brazil, and the way how historically the United States is able to, if you go into a university, there's an auditorium with the multiracial, and we have to sometimes struggle for this to happen here. So the presence, and it's 54% of the population, that any entrepreneur should be aware of this. These are their consumers, and I see that these are 54% of citizens that have to have this. If you don't have the basic for everyone, you have the brain, the heart, and the stomach. That's what the culture does. What a balance. So in this, we went ahead and came back. I'm not even going to mention this, the steps back that we took, because it makes me sad. And if did we advance? Yes, we must continue advancing. We have to believe. Period. How is the recovery with the circuit, Carol? Anyways, well, honestly, I don't feel a difference of the audience. I think it's still the same profile, very similar profile in our case. I think we have a design, so I don't see such a difference pre-pandemic and the current scenario. Fabio? Well, it's hard to say because people, sorry for interrupting, do you have any data or information during these 2-year period, the number of Brazilian films in the platforms, was there, did it grow? Were they more sought after? Yes, it grew because there was a higher demand for content, to have content ready to film. Specifically, Sofaz is they leave the movie theaters and go to the platforms. When the film stopped in the movie theaters, then we stopped the flow of films that are marketed, are sold, and advertised. This stopped. And the production also needed ready films that were ready. And the new platforms that were arriving during the pandemic, we had the inclusion of Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, Star Plus, which is Fox, and it also demanded some content. Netflix also demanded content to protect itself. There were interesting things from the point of view of working in the platforms. One of them was a great success, but the 2 films that Diamond made with Santa Rita, the girl that Menina que Matou os Pais, the girl who killed my parents, this attracted a great audience, or the figures were higher than the foreign content. And then the attraction of subscribers, which were a public that would go to the movies, but probably they would have watched it in the theaters, that in this case is facilitated for being at home. People once again are safer, they feel more comfortable to watch this content, national content, at their homes. And the True Prime showed that it is now a trend. We can see that the national productions are looking towards this, because there has to do with the consumption at home. Not necessarily they would work in the theaters. The economic dynamics of the theaters are different. It depends on the product. But there's a lot of demand of low-budget productions. The SOFA had to finance national productions. There was the demand, and we also made some films for digital. Films that were made in home office or small studios or locations with very few crew, and that were commercialized because there was this demand. And now there is perhaps a higher demand for products of higher cost production, that there is also a search for new talent, and this tends to value the national product. At this moment, what happened, I would say that we did expand, especially in the habit of, I think the main factor, the most complex factor, was the lack of incentive to films. I'm not. It was great for the platforms, but we stopped the films in the theaters. It was 2 years without advertisements to go to the theaters because the platforms only advertised series. It was 4 or 5 films that the platforms use as a promotion of their services. The majority was of series, and this is noticeable. We see that the demand of the series are still increasing, and in the digital, at least, the films are still dropping. This is bad, but I believe that there will be a return that as a premium window sensory experience that works in a word of mouth, that it's difficult for a series to do that. But I would say yes, people watched much more series during the pandemic than films.
So how do you see the impact on television regarding during the pandemic? Do you know, was there more subscribers and more people watching? Well, there was this change during the pandemic. We have seen some changes during the pandemic. Well, there were several points that experienced change. During the pandemic, we saw some real big changes. And we had some interesting content. We launched the series with Margareth Menezes. But we had an experience which was really cool. We launched the second series with a group from Salvador, which is the largest humor group of the northeastern region of Brazil. And they're all digital influencers. And the accesses to platform were skyrocketed. In 3 days, there was an incredible number of accesses. As I said, in order to get where we want to get in a country where 54% of the population is black, and not having a well-established channel in any place in the country, I believe we need 40 more years to have a stable situation. You go to the United States, you have over 10 channels that represent like 20% of the population. Europe itself is undergoing a new moment right now in terms of consumption. Afrobeat is present. The production of content is changing radically. In Europe, we see an increase of consumption, and the sector is changing a lot. Well, I don't think it's going to be 40 years. I believe it's going to be much faster. Well, the moment that you just mentioned, YouTube has a multiplying power of influence, in which digital is going to follow. These platforms of national content is going to continue to search, and it's going to be fragmented, more Brazilian content, more fragmented content, and more narratives that communicate with segments that YouTube already communicate. And there's a niche which is sub-used. It is important to monetize this content because it's more relevant today. Of course, there's a lot to be done yet. To have the possibility to have one single creation, like you said, the Desocupados, to bring up the audience and have a place where you can communicate further. It's not a linear path. it can happen in 2 years' time, and it depends on several factors, but I don't believe it is linear. There is one factor, which is technology, which helps to boost things faster than it was. I believe it has to do with education. We have to give the proper name, which is education. COVID brought it to zero. We are discussing topics as if they were taking place now. They've been going on for some time. That's why I say that we still need 40 years. We had 1 million accesses, but in terms of consumption, because our platform is pay-per-view, people accessed but did not consume. If I have the same content free of charge in YouTube, why would I pay for it? The same thing happens to theaters. I have a film which is showing in theaters very night. Myself and my friends went to the movies, and just the 4 of us were there. Nobody else. It was empty. And it was a black film, or a film with black people. It's a lot of work, as you can tell. Well, I forgot to publicize. We are putting together Belas Artes Itaú, Reserva, and releasing in São Paulo and Rio Teograma, because we feel that the lack of money is not something for us. It's something that impacts everyone. We are having a passports with 10 reais, a ticket, in order to reintroduce the habit of movie going. I cannot tell how many years will take to see this change. I saw something in Salvador that I learned. I didn't know it before. There is a Department of Racial Reparation. What is it? That's the expression of a thought. They focus on practices that think about this topic. The question of citizenship building, we know because we are culture. We face this prejudices because we work in a sensitive area. I see this as something that may happen. Things are changing rapidly in Brazil. Nobody would foresee that 15 years ago that we would be navigating in online platforms. Technically speaking, we have the means. There was more film clubs during the dictatorship than we have now. It's something crazy. You have over 1,000 film clubs during dictatorship, because at that time films were a form of expression. Now that we can express ourselves, and we have mechanisms that only need pressing a button, it's something to ask for. We may have advanced technologically, but this does not reflect upon us as a people, in which citizenship is for all. I see this, and our cultural struggle is in this respect. Citizenship for all. Countries that exclude citizenship is not a good place to live. Well, I have no idea of time constraints, but I believe the challenge of the panel initially was to talk about big structures that move structural issues in I believe it is urgent to think about public policies and structure them in terms of audience engagement. It is important. We have to promote circulation and models that allow for the creation of new circulation and grant systems that would be guided by social changes and what we have today. We're both talking about gender, race, equality within the audiovisual, and also look at circulation. I believe we're talking a lot about production, but little in circulation. The grant systems that we have today, what we have in terms of space for creation, in general, the systems of grants are channeling financial resources for a few institutions. I believe that upon producing, we need to release our films at Lul TV and do a lot of marketing action, advertising, and communication. That's the only way we'll see audiences circulating. If we still have to comply with a certain chain which is put to us. I had this challenge of proposing this retaking our space. I believe it is important to understand the possibility. There are 400 platforms that are emerging. We need a lot of negotiation, but at the same time we have to look at the profile of Brazilian production according to this grant. We have to look at the diversity of Brazilian production and see the lines of funding that comprehend all the profiles and works that we have, and not only part of it. And in this sense, we have to look thoroughly. It's a deep analysis that we have to carry out. And of course, we have to look at audience engagement, gender, racial issues. Everything has to be taken into account. And I did my homework here, and I have to tell you what I prepared myself to talk here. Talking specifically about this issue, I believe it's really crucial to take into consideration or into account those independent spaces. They are absolutely crucial for some works. The collective experience has a specific trait. If we compare it to individual or family consumption, it intermediates the public. It has a very good and important role in audience engagement, especially when we talk about grants. It is important to think about these screening spaces as places that should be made the most of in these times. This is a conversation that we had with different members of society. This is a number and circulation which is not concrete. We do not see it. It is difficult to put out public policies if we don't see them. I believe we have technology for that. We had initiatives coming from universities. Why not see that these sessions be shown in different platforms, to think of including these exhibiting spaces as independent spaces with its own audience. It is possible to think, technologically speaking, in terms of bringing there's a number of people who watch these films to this other circuit. We have regulatory framework to exhibit films in public schools. There is legislation, but it is not implemented. Why not to have a dialogue with this contingent of people? We can do offline sessions. By doing this, we'll be able to have this gigantic network of public schools watching these films. I believe we have to make the most of this space. We had a small partnerships with 6 different Brazilian states. 60,000 students went there to watch it, and they sent the reports as 60,000 spectators. If you look at the number of spectators that go to theaters, few films reach 60,000 film goers. Financial support systems that foster this kind of independent spaces understand that audience engagement is qualitative, so we have to know what's being discussed and debated. And we can have a data bank with that information, and also to align it with the regular framework that we have directed to film exhibiting in public schools. Well, at least we would have double the number of spaces to watch the films. Well, that's only in Taturana. If we take into account the schools, we have 3,000 something schools. So it's a wonderful potential to be tapped. With all this technology that we're having, you can access content any place you go. Any other suggestions?
What you're doing in a certain way is already that. There's no battle without a struggle. But taking more audience to the theaters, you are giving incentives. If you look at the theater rooms, they returned 4 or 5 times. This was also a mistake. New York closed the theaters 14 months and they opened all at once. We opened, closed, opened and closed. We had a suffering that was huge. The campaigns that we saw being done and not even putting in practice was several. And now we believe that we're going to do it. I think that passion is something that you must arouse. And that's what we need right now. It's a little irrational, but we need to arouse passion and make this move forward. I think what Messi was talking here, what do we do to agglomerate? If we're free to gather people together, I think we can open these rooms. What I see is if the movie theaters, because what is a filmmaker? What is a producer? He wants a critic success and a audience success. His audience success is tied to people. There is a sadness because no one watched his film, and there's the human side of the artist that doesn't believe in the success that didn't have. That is a place that is present from the exhibitor, the buildings and everything come from this settling. And the artist doing the post-consumption of that piece as well. The film passed in Cannes to be exhibited worldwide. If Cannes exhibited online, this would kill the industry as a whole. So we spent 2 years lost, and we're getting out of this. So you ask us, what is it going to be like? Is too much. We're going to start doing what we can. We're going to release. I'm really fighting that for Lázaro film to get to 500,000 reais or 600,000 reais in box office. Of course, we suffer the conditions that we have here for the Brazilian cinema that has been killed a long time ago. But let us believe and play. Let's try. Well, I think that I'm going to be very honest. The same groups are going to the cinema. I totally agree. And from now on, we're going to, if we're on square one, we have to go to that level to make a maid that leaves the home at 3 o'clock in the morning and wants to go to the movie theater. So we have to think about this aspect. What would make a very poor person go to the movies? The price and the campaigns that you have. This is a place that Brazil doesn't think about. They think about the premium, the award, the box office. We use entertainment. We have to use entertainment as education. So in this square one, we have to rethink about this. And this thing of arousing the passion of people, it can lead to figures that Brazil never experienced. Yes, we have to be prouder than what we think. If we don't talk about everything, it communicates with a lot. It reveals who we are. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all. I'm going to call Victor to call it a wrap. Okay. Thank you. Well, everyone. I'd like to thank your presence for being here. It's a very, the audience is the end result of our work. Perhaps otherwise we wouldn't be here. So this is something that we must do collectively, from movie theaters to streaming, and also the Lázaro is here, is playing here on CCSP, and tomorrow we'll be back. Thank you and have a good evening.